Released in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance and based on the short-lived Superman animated series from the mid-1990s, Superman Countdown to Apokolips is an isometric view video game where you take control of the last son of Krypton and are charged with the never-ending battle to protect the city of Metropolis and the world against a bunch of bad guys. What starts with scuffles against the crime syndicate Intergang and other minor villains slowly shifts gears as you eventually begin to tackle the forces of Kalibak, the eldest son of Darkseid. Hence the name Countdown to Apokolips, referring to the planet that Darkseid resides and rules over. Spoiler, you do not actually go to Apokolips in this game. Ever. I've heard that this was supposed to be a prequel to another game, but I don't have said other game and therefore it shall be nameless, and it will be nameless for the rest of this video. Countdown to Apokolips has 7 levels of play, along with a bonus level that can be accessed under specific conditions. If you have no flippin' clue on how to play the game, there's a handy dandy tutorial mode to teach you the intricacies of Superman's control scheme, a rather helpful feature to help you get up to speed on the gameplay mechanics. Of course, if you're big stuff and don't need no stinking tutorial, you can go ahead and start a new game and indulge yourself in the game's intriguing backstory and unskippable intermissions. If you have a desire to continue a previous adventure, well, you don't have a convenient save feature, but you do have a password system, uppercase, lowercase numbers, and a pound symbol, but at least it's only 6 characters, so it won't kill you all that much. As expected, Superman has a modest set of superpowers at his disposal, the usual heat vision, freeze breath, super speed, flying, and lifting cars and tossing them at bad guys. You apparently also have X-ray vision, which in the context of Countdown to Apokolips serves as this game's map feature to show you where all the hotspots are. The incredible thing about these powers is that there's no imposed limit on them. No need for pickups for temporary heat vision, no need to recharge any meters. If you want to burn criminal scum to the bone all day long, knock your boots out, son. But then you don't want to do that because your performance in each level is graded and your best bet of getting the full 3-shield Monty is to beat everyone with close-up melee attacks and Ixnay on the heat vision. Although this super dash push thing is an acceptable fare. If you manage to get 3 shield ratings for all 7 levels, you get to face off against Metallo in the special bonus level. Because sure, why not? But even if you don't worry. The core 7 levels is all you need to play in order to follow the game's simple yet decently written story. The bonus level is just an extra, and you only get a quick still shot for beating Metallo, so all things considered, it's not that big of a miss if you don't get to it. For what it's worth, Countdown to Apokolips is competently executed. Your main goal usually involves flying over a city block or other wide area beating up bad guys. Once all the baddies from an area are cleared, you eventually confront a boss that you have to contend with, usually requiring some strategy to defeat. The majority of your battles will be low-level intergang street thugs with basic enhanced alien weaponry, and that's pretty much the throwaway explanation on how they're able to dish out the hurt on the Man of Steel. But later on you'll be dealing with kryptonite-powered robots, a couple low-bit villains like Livewire and Metallo, and choppers. Aside from that, there's not much else to the game. No flying through rings, no puzzles to solve, no incredible feats of strength involving spinning planets or knocking out giant asteroids. It's just fly around the city block, beat up all the bad guys, lather, rinse, and repeat. On the one hand, it's nice that they kept things simple without overcomplicating things for the sake of overcomplicating things. On the other hand, Countdown to Apokolips does start to feel a bit tedious after a while, and it doesn't help that the scenery doesn't change a whole lot, as you'll battle in city blocks for the most part of the game, with some deviations atop a train, inside a warehouse, or on a boat. So there's a definite sense of deja vu that starts to creep in after the 3rd or 4th level, and the same deal with only a time limit of sorts. At 7 levels plus a bonus level, Countdown to Apokolips isn't a particularly long game and on a good day can take an hour or so to complete, but there are times where it does feel long. Now, if this were the game's only major hiccup, it wouldn't be such a big deal, but while the game in general is somewhat competently executed, there are some hiccups that chip away at the overall product. The biggest comes in the form of the close quarters combat that the game wants you to use for a good chunk of the game if you want to attain the highest possible rating and eventually unlock that Metallo fight. Suffice it to say, when it comes to close quarters combat, Superman, quite frankly, isn't very good at it. Never mind the punches he throws seem more like he's flailing his arms about like an idiot, and there isn't much in terms of varied fighting moves outside of a delayed super uppercut and tossing cars and frozen popsicles around. But it seems pretty silly that the guy has a hard time dealing with common street thugs. You can justify their attacks do a good chunk of damage due to their weapons being of alien origin, but under no circumstances can you get me to accept that it takes a superpowered being several sissy punches to knock out one jabroni with a pop gun. If anything, a sissy punch from Superman should knock small planets out of orbit. Control is another hurdle that feels somewhat spotty, although for the most part control is generally fine. You can punch, hover, fly, toss stuff, and heat vision people without issues. It works to a point. When it comes to freeze breath or super speed or things of that nature, basically anything that requires you to hold the R trigger, there will be instances where control will not do the thing you want it to do and will end up doing something else entirely. Sometimes you want to freeze something, but you'll end up dashing by accident. This mostly happens when you want to aim in diagonal directions, which is almost any time you're in the boss fight. It's definitely something you can adapt to if you're willing to give it a shot, but it's a nuisance worth mentioning. As stated before, alien weaponry supplied to Inner Gang is the explanation as to why Superman is taking damage from common thugs. It's almost frightening to see how much damage Superman sustains from minor projectile attacks or how easily he is subdued with bear hugs. I get wanting to make a challenging game with the Man of Steel in it, but this just feels like a lazy way of doing it. At least when dealing with kryptonite-powered robots or turrets, it makes some sense, but for the most part, it's something, I suppose. Another thing that's up with the challenge level here is that there's no in-level means of restoring lost health, or at least I haven't found any in my playthroughs of the game. So you pretty much have to try and beat the thing in good health, and sometimes that's a tall ask. Not impossible, mind you, but not quite the most pleasant thing to do. I'll say this much about Countdown to Apokolips. The graphics here are actually pretty decent. Your in-game graphics are nothing amazing, but you can make out Superman, which is the most important thing. Each of the characters are appropriately sized and look fairly decent. The animation is crisp and fluid, by GBA standards at least, and on a whole it's a rather colorful looking game. Somewhat bright and vibrant. Possibly good enough for the older GBA models with no backlight. Don't hold me to that since I don't have one of those units. On a larger screen it looks slightly worse, but it's still decent for the most part. The cutscenes are hit and miss. On the one hand, in regards to the still imagery, they're actually nicely done, either comprising some mid-quality stills or promotional images from the cartoon, or really simply good mimicry. And even the interactions between characters during the intermissions aren't too bad. They're simple, but the writing is pretty good here actually, and they're believable. On the other hand though, you can't skip these cutscenes. Ever. You have to sit through these lines of text all throughout each and every time you play. It's not too bad the first couple times where you might actually care about the story, as paper thin as it is and as well written as it is, but having to sit through the same intro every time after every failed attempt starts to wear thin, and you kinda wish you could just skip over them, like most games would allow you to. Unfortunately, there's no tunes from the Superman animated series to be found here. Instead, you have some really generic sounding techno beats. Nothing too exciting, but it is leagues above the anemic ambiance of Superman's sole Nintendo 64 outing, which isn't really saying much, but it is something. A very small something. Okay, I'll stop now. Sound effects are tinny sounding, but otherwise okayish at best. That's all I got. There's a couple grunts in there. Whatever. Close but no cigar is the cliche that sums up Superman Countdown to Apokolips for Game Boy Advance, which I'll concede is certainly a serviceable attempt at giving the Man of Steel a worthwhile video game outing. It's just not as good as it could have been. While the game is functional in that it plays well enough and looks pretty decent for the most part, combat feels restrictive, the gameplay in general is quite monotonous, and it simply doesn't do enough interesting things to make the experience worthwhile, and having to sit through the same cutscenes over and over again without the ability to skip over them doesn't quite help matters. This could have been a decent or even passable little Superman adventure on the go, and in fairness, it's a far better Superman outing than say Fortress of Solitude for GBA or even the N64 outing without question. But as it is, Superman Countdown to Apokolips is merely average. Not great, not bad, it's just there. Meh.